We are now in the third part of the second lecture. We start with a discussion of the difference between welfare and freedom-oriented moral theories. The example of wealth inequality and redistribution of wealth is discussed next, keeping in mind that this redistribution is endorsed by utilitarianism. As an objection to that kind of redistribution of wealth, libertarianism will be introduced. Libertarianism is the next to utilitarianism moral theory that we are studying next. Self-ownership and choice is what libertarianism is based on. Self-ownership really is the founding value here. Previously, we dove into the moral theory of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is based on the value of welfare, or well-being, or happiness, broadly defined as benefits and pleasure or satisfaction. The other two values were that of freedom and virtue. In this lecture, we go deeper into a discussion of freedom by exploring a moral theory of freedom, libertarianism. Libertarianism attempts to give an ethic on the basis of freedom. Sandel attempts to show that there is something deeply right about libertarianism's account of freedom, but a better account of freedom is still needed, due to the objections that Sandel argues cannot be adequately handled by libertarianism. Sandel brings to our attention that US income inequality has become vast and is growing. There's something intuitively wrong with that the richest 1% of Americans possess more than the wealth of 90% of Americans combined. That is at least our initial strong reaction to the hearing of this distribution pattern, whether we change our mind later or not. We can articulate the problem here in two ways initially. One, it's unfair. Surely, the top 1% does not work that much harder than the rest of Americans. Two, the utilitarian problem. Happiness in the country is not maximized with this kind of wealth arrangement. A utilitarian moral action is the one that brings about the greatest benefits, happiness, for the greatest number of living beings. Surely, the sum total of happiness in the country would be maximized. For example, if $3,000 were taken from each of the persons in the top 1% and given to more people in the bottom 90%, 1,000 each. What's suffering from a loss of $3,000 for a billionaire compared to the gain in happiness of the many more people who make $25,000 a year and would receive another 1,000? There is a strong utilitarian case for redistribution of wealth. Surprisingly enough, the first objection to wealth redistribution comes from utilitarianism itself. If we redistribute wealth from those who make more of it, then they will be disincentivized to work hard. And the folks at the bottom are also disincentivized from working harder, since they are receiving all this money transferred to them from the wealthy. A response to the first objection is that a rate of taxes, because that's what we're talking about here, taxes for redistribution. The objection is that the rate of taxes can surely be adjusted so that income is both redistributed from the rich to the poor and yet leaves enough of the increased wealth for the rich to incentivize them to keep increasing their wealth. The second objection is of greater interest to us at this point. It comes from the libertarian theory of morals, and according to it, redistribution of wealth violates the fundamental right to liberty that all human beings have. It is violated in this case. It is violated in this case in those from whom the wealth is taken for redistribution. Libertarian theory champions freedom as what a human being fundamentally is. But freedom, as such, is a vague concept, and there is more than one way to interpret it. Libertarians interpret freedom to be a freedom of choice, in that persons are not forced or coerced to do what they do not choose to do. They should not be. Wealthy persons, from whom wealth should be redistributed, would be forced to give up wealth against their choice. As Sandel puts it, redistribution of wealth would be forced charitable donation from the standpoint of libertarianism. But the deeper and foundational and underlying idea in the libertarian theory is that of ownership. Each one of us owns themselves to the extent that each one of us should not be forced to do what we do not choose to do. And just as we own ourselves, we own our labor and the fruits of our labor. Anyone who takes some of the fruits of our labor, say for distribution to others, is stealing from us. In this sense, ownership, or rather self ownership, is basic to the libertarian conception of what it means to be a human being. The idea of freedom of choice articulates the deeper idea of self ownership. Choice reflects and is founded on ownership.